In the name of God, most compassionate, abundantly merciful, peace be upon you. Welcome to another session of From the Desk of Ghamidi. The series of discussions continues on the 23 question series, and today we are to begin the 129th episode. What is Sunnah? This question is under discussion. Today we have the 15th session on this topic. Let's begin. Ghamidi Sahab, thank you very much for your time. The principles for the ascertainment of Sunnah, which you have stated in your book, Meezan, we have discussed 6 of the principles in detail. We learned those principles and their applications too, and would like you to start the discussion from that very point and tell us the 7th and the last principle stated in this regard in your book, and what is the backdrop of this principle, what was the need to formulate it, and what is it that is being discussed in it.
Before we start discussing the 7th principle, I would like to summarize what we have understood so far in a few points. This summary itself is necessary to understand the 7th principle. The summary is that whatever is reported in attribution to the Prophet, if it constitutes the circumstances or incidences of the times of his birth or before and after the prophethood in his life, or his virtues and qualities, or his appearance, or the experiences with which he had come across, likewise his likes and dislikes. The appropriate topic for all these would be the Prophet's seerah. It won't be termed Sunnah. All things of a worldly nature will also come under it. The Prophet had worn the amama, or he liked to eat dates. All things of this nature will form the different chapters of the prophetic biography. Even if there are narrations reported about the Messenger of God in the past and present, they will also be kept in the same section. This is the first point. The second point is that the religion which the Prophet has given us in the form of the Quran and Sunnah, if he offers some elaboration or answers some question with regard to it, or if some creative juridical applications of it are explained by him, and he states that several times for emphasizing it, it will still be termed a statement only. It may be the statement of human nature, or it may be the statement of the Quran, and it may be the statement of Sunnah too. However, it won't be termed Sunnah. The third point is that when the Prophet acts on the directives of the religion he brought with it, the states of his that emerged before us, and a picture would be formed for his enactment of the religion, and the people who would see that picture would also transmit it, and state it too, if we wish to state it further. At some instant, then we would term it as exemplary model. If the Prophet had made ablution, obviously, once it is prescribed and became a part of the religion. Now the Prophet does it daily, or he might have done it 5 times daily, and the people might have seen it, so this is a model before us, and the Quran has expressed it as the exemplary model. That is, the Messenger of God, in order to fulfill the requisites of the religion or to enable the enactment of the directives of the religion, when he himself enacts and sets it as a model of emulation, that is the best model for us and is called Uswa-e-Hasna. The fourth and the last point is that if the Prophet of God, in compliance with the general guidance and their applications, has mentioned something, or some supplication has been stated by his tongue, then the appropriate term for that too would be reminders or preachings or supplications which are transmitted. This is the right term for it. That too would not be termed Sunnah. What is its logical consequence? The word Sunnah would apply to those directives which are independent, sui generis directives of the religion, and which have been issued by the Prophet over and above the Quran. In the light of these principles, we can say that if Sunnah is defined, I have given its introduction earlier. If Sunnah is defined, then it would be that over and above the Quran, the independent directives of the religion which have been issued from the Prophet's side. The independent directives of the religion, keep this word in mind. What does mustaqil bizzat mean? Mustaqil bizzat means that if that directive wasn't issued from God or His Messenger, then we wouldn't have understood that independently in the light of the Quran. Neither we could have ascertained them in the light of human nature. nor we could have sorted out any application of it on our own. Neither we could have taken any creative juridical decision about it. Neither you and me, nor Abu Hanifa or Shafi could have done it. If we could have done it beforehand, then it naturally would be a clarification or an explanation of a rule existing from before. Then it does not constitute an independent directive. The independent directives of the religion would be stated under Sunnah, and the word Sunnah would only be used for them. Now, if you agree that this is Sunnah and this is what Sunnah should be, the category in which the rest of the things would belong to, that I have stated, that is, we would call it biography and life history, or we would call it exemplary model, or we would call it his understanding and elaborations. Likewise, we would term it transmitted supplications, or transmitted liturgical formulae, or similar terms of this type would be adopted. We would adopt all these terms, but we won't use the word Sunnah. I said that if you agree with this point, then I would ask you that the directives which are independent and sui generis, can those be left at the mercy of the narrations of one or two persons?
No.
That is, if the Prophet of God has come to teach religion to the world, and its responsibility has been entrusted upon him, and he has been directed in the Book of God to communicate this religion, and the responsibility of its transmission to each and every person lies on him, then is it possible that from among the independent directives of the religion, there is a command, and that is made known in answer to a question of a person? He tells it among his family members, or he tells it to a visitor, and the rest of the people remain ignorant about it? The intellect demands that things of such a nature be communicated by the Prophet to each and every person, and he states them and makes sure that they have been conveyed to each and every person. That is, either those would comprise the things established earlier, or it would be something new from the Prophet's end. So, emphasis would be given too. The people would be told as well. That would be communicated too. And what would be its natural consequence? The same which Imam Shafi had stated in the period of the companions too. It was difficult to imagine, even with regard to a single Muslim, that he had remained ignorant of it. Each and every person would be knowing it. And when each and every person would be knowing it, what then would be its outcome? It would further be transmitted with the consensus and practical adherence of the companions. And when it is transmitted through the consensus and perpetual adherence of the companions, then further, from one generation to another, the consensus of that knowledge would also take place in the community. This is a mandatory intellectual and rational requirement if something relates to all, and if the Prophet of God has conveyed this to everyone, and the nature of the thing requires it to be conveyed to everyone, then it would be in the knowledge of everyone, and would be described in the form of word and deed for everyone. When something is stated by the word and practice for everybody, then it is termed as consensus and practical adherence. I have elaborated this point in quite a detail. Keeping this in view now, listen to the seventh and the last principle which I have stated. I have written, the seventh principle is that, like the Quran is not established through an isolated source, that is, something which has been reported in attribution to the Prophet by a single person, or two or four persons. And what is that thing? That is an independent directive of the religion. Now pause at this point and understand, if that constitutes a point of biography, then it should surely be stated, it would be stated too, it would be listened to and read too. And if that conforms to the standards of research, then it would be accepted as well. If it is something to be understood and explained, if it is a statement of fitrah, or a statement of the Quran, or if it's the statement of Sunnah and any other thing of this type, if it reaches through some isolated source, it will be acknowledged and accepted and will further be told to the people, although investigation would definitely be done, like I have said to you earlier, whether its attribution is right or wrong. However, there won't be any objection on the basis of it being reported by 1, 2, or 4 people. It is being stated in an isolated report. The same case would be for uswa-e hasna. A directive has been given in religion, and we are aware of it. With regard to it, if a single person or two persons among the wives of the Prophet, a companion or an acquaintance, a visitor tells that the ablution with which you are aware, he says that he saw the Prophet doing ablution in such a manner, or he saw him offering prayer in this manner, or he saw the Prophet offering sacrifice, so we would accept it, and it will be quite a blessing for us that we are becoming aware of the way in which the Prophet had enacted a ritual. So this would be categorized in the section of Uswa-e Hasna. We would accept it from the isolated sources too. However, an independent and sui generis directive won't be acceptable. The same is the case of those reminders and those supplications too, which the Prophet had occasionally carried out. However, he did not issue it further with respect to the religion and did not fix any methodology for them. It was just that the people listened, understood, or at times when the Prophet had taught them, and those were transmitted to us.
Okay, Ghamidi Sahab, I need a point of clarification here. You said it just now that the Quran demands that it does not get transmitted from an isolated source of news. And while discussing the point that had occurred earlier, that in the Quran too, there are some directives which are the statements of Fitrah too, and the statement of Sunnah also occurs there. However, when it is said that the Quran wasn't transmitted from isolated news, hence it implies that the entire Quran is independent, although it contains the statements of Fitrah as well as the statements of Sunnah, yet it should not have been transferred in the way an isolated report is taking place.
For the reason that God had not said this about the Quran, that these are some directives of mine, and you will have to transmit them further onwards. With regard to the Quran, it is not its content or inclusions, rather, its transmission in its own words. That would be transmitted in the capacity of the Word of God. It is a book which has been revealed unto the Prophet, peace be upon him. Whatever is stated there is an issue of the later stage. The first thing is that it reaches us in the words of God, and it was communicated to the Prophet in the words of God. Archangel Gabriel had read it to him in those very words. Hence, the real issue is the transmission of those words, and for the rest of the things, the issue is of the transmission of the directives or commandments and the prohibitions. That is, the content is under discussion here. Now, if something is narrated with attribution to the Prophet, then it will be seen whether it is some independent directive or it isn't something of this type. If that thing could be deduced on our own, or it can be ascertained through independent critical means, and its application can be understood, and it may be described by some Abu Hanifa or Imam Shafi, then its need would be eliminated, and it would be sufficient that one single person or two persons may report it, and if it is not reported, although he had learned that particular thing from the Prophet, that too won't matter at all. This is the thing which has been kept in view while stating the whole point. The seventh principle is that, like the Quran is not proven through isolated source of reportage, since the objective is to communicate the whole Quran intact, the Quran has to be further transmitted in the capacity of a discourse when the point is accepted about it that it cannot be proven through isolated report. Whenever it has to be proven, it would be through perpetual adherence and consensus. It would be transmitted in the capacity of an uninterrupted words, and we have had lengthy discussions about it earlier. The Quran does not get proven through isolated news. Similarly, Sunnah too does not get proven through it, since it too is independent and sui generis, and there too nothing can be left to the understanding of the people. For that too, the risk cannot be taken in terms of a person opting to report it or not reporting it at all. It cannot be accepted under any circumstances that some part of it might remain unexposed to the people, or in the process of its further transmission, and as a result of a debate about it, people are not able to deduce it in rightly. For this reason, the Sunnah was transmitted in this manner. The seventh principle is that, like the Quran does not get proven from isolated news, in the same way, Sunnah also is not proven through it. Now the reason is being stated, which I had elaborated. The status of Sunnah in the religion is of an independent directive. It is mustaqil bizzat, which implies that it cannot be obtained through independent creative reasoning, understanding or application, or through rational argumentation. It has to transmit through God and His Messenger under all conditions. When it will transmit in this manner, then it would become the directive of God. And since it is mustaqil bizzat, independent, hence the same arrangement for transmission is required as it is in case of the Quran. The Prophet was responsible for transmitting it, that is, the Sunnah, with full care and with full precaution and with absolute certitude to the entire humanity. Since it is the collection of independent directives of the religion, hence you see that the words used are full care and caution. Each and every person comes to know about it. It comes to his knowledge and gets aware of it with absolute protection and in a definite manner where the element of any suspicion is totally removed. He was responsible to transmit it to the human beings. Like in the case of isolated news, it could not have been left to the decision of the people that if they wish, they transmit it further and may not transmit them at all if they so wish. It happens in the case of isolated reports that a person hears some point from the Prophet or he has observed something. It is his discretion whether he communicates it further or not. If he thinks that he isn't ready to take up this responsibility, we are aware that many companions did not like this, so they didn't narrate it further onwards. This cannot be tolerated in the case of independent directives of the religion. That has to necessarily reach to the people, and people have to necessarily act upon them as well, and that has to be necessarily transmitted further onwards too. Therefore, it is necessary that they are transmitted through such a means where there isn't the least possibility of an error. Like the case of isolated reports, it could not have been left at the discretion of the people. A person or the other hears it, or someone among the wives of the Prophet hears it, or if a person being a part of the delegate hears or sees it, and whether he chooses to report it or chooses not to report it, this cannot be left to their discretion. Therefore, similar to the Quran, the source of Sunnah is the consensus of the community. That is, how then will the Sunnah be obtained like the Quran was? Through the consensus of Muslims. Like the Quran is not dependent on our finding some verse or verses or surah of the Quran being reported in some isolated narrations, or there exists some chain of narration for it. It is being transmitted through the consensus of Muslims, and exactly in the same fashion Sunnah too is being transmitted through their consensus and their practical perpetual adherence. Therefore, similar to the Quran, the source of Sunnah is consensus too, and that Quran, the manner in which it has been transmitted through consensus and perpetual adherence, verbal adherence of the companions, the consensus of the Prophet's companions, all the companions have learned that point in a scholarly way and have transferred it further onwards, and that has further transmitted among their future generations. The manner in which it has been transmitted through consensus and perpetual adherence, verbal adherence of the companions, in the same manner, this Sunnah has been obtained through their consensus and practical adherence. What was it? It was the consensus of knowledge. All companions are saying that it is the Book of God. They are aware of it, and they are transmitting its news further. And verbal adherence, in dozens or rather in hundreds, they are transmitting it further in full, and that is being transmitted further verbally through their repetition. It has termed as qawli tawatur, verbal adherence. In Sunnah, the consensus takes place in the same manner. It is the knowledge of the people. Everybody knows it. The complete Muslim scholarly tradition is aware of it. Each and every companion knows about it. And practically too, it is being transmitted by the actions of a huge multitude of people. And this is achieved through practical adherence, by a lesser means, a means lesser than perpetual adherence and consensus. This is the greatest means for the transmission of something. By any lesser means, the uswa-e-husna, or the narration of tafhim of tabi'in, of the Messenger of God, can surely be accepted. That is all those things which I have stated earlier, biographical information, too would be accepted Uswa-e-Hasna would also be accepted. Understanding and expositions too would be accepted. The transmitted supplications and reminders would also be accepted. The Uswa-e-Hasna, or the narration of his understanding and expositions, can surely be accepted. However, the Quran and Sunnah can in no way be proven like this. Like the Quran we have, and which has reached us through consensus and perpetual adherence of Muslims. In comparison to it, if a person or a few persons state it, and no matter how trustworthy they might appear, that this too is a verse of the Quran, and we have heard it from the Prophet, and it is not a part of the Quran which we presently possess, then such a claim would not be acceptable. In the same way, the Sunnah which has transmitted through consensus and perpetual adherence, in comparison to them, if something is reported in this manner, narrated by 1, 2, 4, or a dozen persons, they have in their possession an independent directive of the religion with them, that which they had seen or heard, then that too would not be accepted as well. It's a matter of principle. Now you will ask if anything in the Quran has been transmitted through isolated reports. The answer to it is not at all, except the fact that some of the things which the people have narrated, however, the due investigations reveal that this attribution is erroneous. In the same way, you may ask that though principally the point is correct, has anything from Sunnah or an independent directive of the religion in attribution to the Prophet been transmitted through isolated reports? Would it be required to refuse its acceptance? The answer to it that it has never been transmitted. This has practically taken place, and this has been the principle too. Hence, I have stated it in the capacity of event too, and have also explained in detail that like the Quran, Sunnah too has been transmitted through consensus and perpetual adherence. What is consensus and what is perpetual adherence was explained in detail with reference to Imam Shafi and Imam Sarakshi. Now, I wish to humbly submit that we should be content that there isn't any such thing which has been transmitted to us through a lesser means that these.
Right, Ghamidi Sahab, these 7 principles for the ascertainment of Sunnah were discussed in great details in several episodes. Subsequently, rationality demands that the list formulated by Ghamidi Sahab do all the points of Sunnah pass through these 7 filters. From that list of Sunnah, we will bring each and every point under discussion and see whether those 7 conditions qualify them. And we will also learn that among these 7 principles given by Ghamidi Sahab, which principle differs from the traditional Muslim interpretation for the ascertainment of Sunnah, and what justifications Ghamidi Sahab has for them. We are run out of time now. We shall be back in your service again. Thank you very much for your time till now.